It's on Alma's Facebook page, Omri.
Yes, we're live. We're live also now on the Facebook page. So if everyone's ready.
So Yifa, you can share it, Mesibat Tzviya.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, we'll be right there in a sec. All right, so if everyone's ready, I'd like to start. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Alma. I'm Avram Levine. I'm the new media director of Alma Center. Thank you for joining us from all over the world. So good evening to our Israeli viewers and good morning in the States. Very excited to be with you today. It's 10th of June, 2020. And what we'll be talking about is the legal aspects of the blue line, the border between Israel and Lebanon, our northern border, and in terms of the legal aspects of the blue line, the disputes, and the UN force that's in charge of maintaining peace in this area. And we'll elaborate later on. A few housekeeping notes before we begin, so I don't forget anything. At Alma Center, we focus our research on three sides of the border, we like to say. So Syria on the east, Lebanon on the north, subject of the day, and the Israeli side of the border. Usually what we do is meet you on the border, various tours, simulations. Due to the corona, that all changed. So we're shifting all of our work to online projects such as this webinar, virtual tours online, and even starting to work on our simulation, which is a little more complicated to work on from online, but we're getting it worked out, and everybody you can follow to get updates. So because we're working online, we really appreciate it, especially if you're watching us live. Share this information. If you could share the link, to anyone that's interested around the world, we'd really appreciate it. One last thing about today, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them, especially on the Zoom. It's a little easier on that platform, but you can also leave it on Facebook, on the Facebook Live on our page. And we'll try to get it, time permitting, we'll try to answer all the questions. With us today, we have Yifa Segal. Really excited to have Yifa here. Founder and executive director of the International Legal Forum, an international legal arm fighting against terror, anti-Semitism, and delegitimization. Former from Tatzpit Press Service and Shurat Adin. If I didn't tell you this, but there's papers I use a lot. I share actually different subject, not necessarily the North, but really appreciate the work. And of course, we have Sarit Zehavi, our CEO and founder of Alma. 15 years of intelligence in the IDF, a lot of knowledge about the North. And actually, all of our research is here. So this is one of our core subjects. So we're really happy to talk about things today. Let's get down to business. So we hear a lot of things going on in Lebanon. Not only on the border, also in the north, Beirut protests. So I'd like to start with Sarit. If you can give us a short summary of like an update of what's going on today. What's going on, just a few sentences, if you can give us, I'll appreciate that.
Okay, I will try to do it in few levels. So I want to begin with the level of what you see, because now it's not the time to travel. And as you said, we are doing virtual tours. And in opposed to the situation that we experienced the first few years right after the last war with Lebanon in 2006, today Hezbollah is a presence on the border with flags, with posters intimidating Israel, commemorating Soleimani was assassinated by the Americans. with the holes that were created by Hezbollah on the fence a month and a half ago in 3 different places along the fence. Here and there, different provocations. The border area is getting interesting every day. I can put it this way. And in the past, I don't know, more than a decade that I'm doing what I'm doing, I don't remember such a busy era along the borderline with a crossing of Africans, foreign workers in Lebanon into Israel, escaping the difficult economic situation in Lebanon, shepherds that are crossing the blue line and having some frictions with the IDF is something that was very regular and common, but provocations of Hezbollah here and there, provocations with the Lebanese armed forces, while IDF is working in enclaves, which if I will explain in a minute, what are the enclaves? All of that is suddenly happening in a very short time. And that's why it's interesting. While the situation, the economic situation in Lebanon is, I think, the most difficult we ever experienced in the past decades, even before the COVID-19, and especially while the COVID-19. And the political situation is also pretty new to us because the government of Lebanon today is completely under the control of Hezbollah. And this is the outcome of a protest that was going on since October. I think the most difficult we ever this is not exactly what the protesters wanted, but this is the outcome of the protest. And now in the past week or so, we see more protest that is going on against brutally and in a very bold way and a strong way against Hezbollah, calling to the disarmament of Hezbollah from its weapon cause that were hardly heard in Lebanon in the past decade or so. So this is very interesting, the processes that we are now experiencing from there.
So, if I understand what you're saying, it's an interesting time, but I think we'll have to look a little back. So we have a very long history with Lebanon, a couple of wars. But if I understand, as I understand it, we are mostly talking about the situation from 2006 to today. Now, I want to turn to Yifa. Can you explain what's the dispute? There's a border, very quiet, stable border, by the way. So what's the question? Why are we even calling it a blue line and not a border? Floor is yours, Yifa.
Cancel the mute.
Yeah. Well, I think, well, you're asking a very good question and a very complicated answer. There's a history class that we can now, I think, take an hour and a half at least to go through, but I'll do it very fast. I'll try to do it in a minute and a half. How about that? So the history of the region is very, very complicated. I mean, I'll take you back to the time of the Ottoman Empire, and the British and the French wanted to come here and conquer these territories. The British army was already in Egypt, and then of course the First World War erupted. But before they even, the first soldiers even marched into Palestine, into Israel, the agreement between Sykes and Picot, the British and the French, was signed in London. So basically these people that were never here and didn't know, not the territory, not the culture, not the people, not the, the challenges of the region, basically sat down in an office and just imagine in the year 1914, took a map that doesn't have such a, high resolution or anything, and just drew like a straight line. So that was the first line, the Sykes-Picot line. And then the war started, and the armies came here. Mostly the British advanced from the south, from Egypt, upwards north toward Palestine, Israel, and then up toward what is today Syria and Lebanon. And then they established a new line. Okay, I'm gonna make the whole story very short, but they've basically established a new line that was now a line that divided the authorities between the British and the French on the ground. And then after the San Remo conference in 1921, they've decided to make it more accurate. If you remember, the San Remo resolution decided to reconstitute the Jewish historical home in our ancestral homeland. And so people say that part of what kind of drove the British to insist on making a few small adjustments to the line that existed before was the fact that there were Jewish communities that already were established on what we now know as our northern border. So if anyone has ever been to our northern border, then you know Metula. Metula is weird. I mean, if you look at Metula, it's just like a finger goes up the finger of the Galilee, and it's very different from those very, very straight lines that they used to draw in those offices in London before knowing, you know, anything about what goes on the ground. So going back to your question, what are all these disputes? Okay, so first of all, there's a difference. There's a difference between those lines. Now there's an objective difference and a subjective difference. First of all, we don't really know, you know, on a map with not a very good resolution exactly where that line was drawn. That was one problem. And the second thing is that there was a difference between the first line and then the second line that they have drawn on the ground. Okay, as I told you, one of the reasons, there were other reasons or other considerations, was to bring in the Jewish communities, all the Jewish communities, into the British mandate for Palestine. So the line was no longer straight. It went all the way like this, created some weird enclaves like Metula, like Misgaf Am, like other places. I hope that made sense to you guys. But so basically what Hezbollah is now saying, there's a difference between the version of Lebanon to this problem, of the government of Lebanon, and Hezbollah's argument to it. So Lebanon, really, we'll talk about, you know what, we'll talk about the year 2000 for a second. In the year 2000, the IDF, the state of Israel, has decided to withdraw, right, from southern Lebanon back into the international line. Now, what is that international line? That international line was the last line that was drawn by the British, okay, as I told you, and I think it was 1924, after the San Remo resolution, that went a little bit like this. And this was the recognized international border, if you will, between the British mandate and the French mandate. So the state of Israel, as far as I understand it, went to great lengths and efforts to really make sure that every single centimeter was according to what the original line was. This was an impossible mission to try to understand exactly what it was, but for months and months and months, there was a whole unit in the IDF that went and looked for that line, and that's where the army withdrew to. Now, the state of Lebanon is saying, you know, you got it a little bit wrong. There were 13 places along the map where, you know, you took the line a little bit south and it should have been a little bit north or south. So they have a few reservations like that. They disagree with the line as Israel understood it at the time. They disagree with the line as the United Nations agree with it at the time. So this is why this is still disputed. So this is Lebanon. Hezbollah, I don't know how much you want me to talk about it in a row, but Hezbollah has all other problems that I personally believe come from a more, let's say, a political agenda rather than a real legal one. Avram, tell me where you want me to take this. You are.
No, I think it's important to talk about Hezbollah because it seems like, at least historically, in the last 20 years, since personally I left Lebanon May 24th, right? I think our main partner on the other side of the border is Hezbollah in a way, and not the Lebanese government. If you could still differentiate, then go for it.
Yeah, that's challenging. That's challenging. All right, so let's start with Hezbollah's one of the main and possibly strangest claims that Hezbollah has. And the thing is that remember that I told you that after they drew the straight line, they went and like the other line that kind of took into account the reality on the ground. But the second line kind of left 7 Shiite villages outside of what was originally meant to be a part of the French mandate's territory. So the British kind of got 7 Shiite villages that maybe they weren't supposed to have, or didn't supposed to have, but it wasn't a part of the original line, okay? And so Hezbollah is basically saying, even when Israel went back to that line from 1924, that we all know, that we all recognize, that was marked for decades along the border between the British mandate and French mandate, and then Lebanon and Israel, Syria and Israel, they still disagree with that, and they say, until the day will come that, you know, Israel withdraws back to the territory that included those 7 Shiite villages, Israel hasn't withdrawn from Lebanon, full stop, and we are committed to the armed struggle, as we all know it. They sing the song. I think a very interesting detail to know about those villages, about the original people of those villages, by the way, is that Palestinians, the people that lived here in the British mandate during the War of Independence and ran north to Lebanon, are all still they all still haven't received citizenship, full rights from the Lebanese government. They still live in refugee camp. They're still forbidden from working in some areas or education in some areas. Everyone but the people that left those 7 villages. Those people got like a special status with the Lebanese, or Hezbollah especially. And I think it was 1994 that they've got full rights, full citizenship. They have like a totally different status from any other person that is now still considered to be a Palestinian refugee living in Lebanon. So the 7 villages, I think, is the most interesting question. This is not a line that is recognized by anyone. Like, this is something that no one even looks back to. I mean, the line that was considered the border in some sense since 1924 and until, I don't know, you can say today more or less, is that second line, right? That includes Metula in Israel and Misgavam in Israel and all those enclaves and the new terrain that was created that was based on that groundwork that they did. There are a few other things that Hezbollah is raising. Avraham, I'm in your hands. Tell me where you want me to take this. Shaba Farms, Rajer, where do you want me to go, or should I stop?
I don't think we want to be to get too technical, but I would want to. I do think that Shaba Farms is an important issue, because I think Hezbollah, or Nasrallah specifically, head of Hezbollah, brings it up more often. So if you can explain that situation, and I think that's enough.
Right. Okay. So Shaba Farms, that is a very, very complicated issue. Very, very complicated issue. By the way, I mean, Sarit, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think no one lives there until today, right? No one lives in the Shaba Farms, right? No one. So it's, you know, I think there's like 800 kilometers or something like that. And no one lives there for many, many, many years. But the problem that was with the Shaba Farms is that during the war, the Six-Day War in 1967, when eventually at the end of the war, Israel took over the Golan Heights, they took over this territory thinking that it's Syria. Now, the problem is that no one has ever really taken the time or the trouble to draw a very specific, you know, very concrete line separating between Lebanon and Syria. So, you know, at the time it was legitimate, completely legitimate, you know, for the IDF to believe. I mean, even the citizens there believed that they are a part of Syria. And so when the IDF takes over that territory and still holds that territory, if they go on Heights today, you know, it's a Syrian territory. Now, the question of what Israel would do with that area of the Golan that was taken from Syria in 1967 is very, very different from the question of what Israel is meant to do with a territory that is Lebanese territory. Now, if you ask me, I think Hezbollah is basically exploiting this issue. I mean, there were some problems between the Lebanese and the Syrians before 1967 that basically are talking about it, the Lebanese saying it's ours, Syrians, but it wasn't that much of a big deal. There was a whole mess there. No one really cared. As far as we understand it, there were people there that went to serve in the Syrian army and then went to school in Lebanon or had friends, were Shiites and were culturally a part of the Lebanese society, and then went to work in Syria. It was a whole mess. And so basically, like I said, I mean, if that territory, and that's the argument, if that is a Lebanese territory, then Israel hasn't fully withdrawn to that line, to that blue line, and got completely out of Lebanon. And this is something that Hezbollah is using to attack Israel and to kind of incite their own people against Israel and attack Israel on an international level, to say that we haven't really fully complied with the UN resolution 1701. That's the gist of it.
All right, thank you very much. Sarit, basically, if I'm understanding what Yifa is saying in a delicate way, I'll be blunt. Is all these issues, Shaba, this border, that border, we didn't even go into the maritime border and the question of the gas, but is this all an excuse for Hezbollah to just mess around with us? Or are these really core issues you think we should deal with?
Before answering your question, I just want to take 30 seconds to say something about what Yifa said, because it just reminded me of my family. My grandmother was born in Beirut, and my father was born in Damascus. And when I grew up and I tried to understand what's my origins, my father told me, Sarit, stop differentiating. I can't say the word in English. Differentiating. You will distinguish between Syria to Lebanon. It's the same. It's the same culture. The feeling was that there was a free movement. There was no, and I'm speaking about 100 years ago, of course, okay?
Right, no fence between the states ever.
No fence between the states, and many Lebanese back then believed that they should be part of Syria. So I think that's why, and the French themselves, by the way, the French agenda, by the way, was definitely at the beginning an agenda of what to do with this Lebanon, because they wanted to help the Maronites there, the Christians there, but on the other hand, they understood that many people are demanding that Lebanon will be part of Syria. So I think when you look at the bigger picture, you understand the smaller picture of Raja and this specific village. To your question, whether these are all excuses, yes, no doubt that we could have achieved a peace agreement with Lebanon long ago if Hezbollah was not on top of things in Lebanon. And we had serious negotiations last year with the leadership of the Americans. They were the mediators there. David Satterfield was very busy in this, coming in and out in Lebanon and Israel, trying to get to a comprehensive agreement that will include the ground corridor and the ground border and the maritime border, which in the maritime border, yes, it involved gas, since Lebanon and Israel having a small dispute about, and I want to show you this on a map for one moment. The Lebanon-Israel has a dispute about the gas. Wow, I lost it. Avan, can you show the map, please? Our map.
Our northern border?
The map of our map of the sector, where you can see the maritime border, and you can see the difference between the two borders. And actually, it's a very small area of about 800 square kilometers, but a very small area, which is very important because the assessments are that there is gas there, which means a lot of money. And the Lebanese already sold the rights for gas in this area to a Russian company in this specific block, which is named Block 9. And that's why I think that this, of course, can bring prosperity to Lebanon, but the Americans wanted to create an agreement that would be comprehensive with also solving the ground border. But Hezbollah was against that. And eventually the negotiations failed and we couldn't get to an agreement. And since then, of course, while now the government is the government that is, as I've said, completely under the control of Hezbollah, I don't see any progress in this respect. One last sentence about that. The main reason that, as you said, the Lebanese, the Hezbollah are taking advantage of this for these days is the wall. IDF is trying to build a wall along the Israeli-Lebanese border, trying to give an answer to a future ground attack of Hezbollah. Hezbollah developed an offensive plan, and about 13 kilometers were already built out of the 130 kilometers of border. Now, I don't know how to translate this into miles, but around 80 miles of border and about less than 10 miles were built a wall, pretty high wall. And of course, it's not within the interest of Hezbollah. So what the Lebanese were trying to do is to prevent the Israelis from building the wall in areas of disputes, in those 13 areas that Yifa described. But eventually, Israel said, we will build the wall along the blue line. We're not going to cross the blue line. We're not going to make any changes in the blue line. And eventually, the wall is being built without any compromises on the Israel security. I guess I will stop here now.
All right. So Yifa ended her what she was speaking about, mentioning 1701, the UN resolution, and actually the strongest player in many ways on the Lebanese side is not Hezbollah and not the Lebanese army. It's the peacekeeping force, the UN Interim Force, UNIFIL, with I think over 10,000 soldiers in South Lebanon that are supposed to be in charge of the situation. So if you can elaborate about what their mandate is on one side and what actually the role they play is today, I think that would give us a broader picture of the situation on their side of the border.
UNIFIL in 1978 was assigned to Lebanon as a small force of about 2,000 soldiers with 4 battalions. It was supposed to be a regular peacekeeping force, as you can see anywhere in the world. But after the war in 2006, its mandate was enhanced and strengthened. The amount of soldiers, as you described, are about 10,000 soldiers. And there is a debate between Israel and, I must say, all others of what is the mandate of UNIFIL. I want to show you a piece of the resolution, the idea, and why the mandate was enhanced, which is the fact that the area of South Lebanon between the Litani River and the Blue Line will be an area free of any armed personnel, assets, and weapons. I'm reading from the resolution, other than those of the government of Lebanon and of UNIFIL as authorized earlier in this resolution. And then you ask the question, okay, so what's the mandate? What they should do? And then I'm moving forward and I'm looking at the mission of UNIFIL. And I say that it should assist the Lebanese armed forces in taking steps toward the establishment of this area between the Litani River and the Blue Line, okay? But also authorizes UNIFIL to take all necessary action in areas of deployment in this area of its forces and at its teams within its capability to ensure that its area of operation is not utilized for hostile activities of any kind. I'm reminding everybody that IDF traced 6 border crossing tunnels of Hezbollah in this area. I'm reminding to everybody that about 40 to 50,000 rockets are stored of Hezbollah. I'm not talking about Lebanese army, are stored in this area. And only last September, Hezbollah launched missiles from this area against IDF vehicle. And luckily, surprisingly, not a single Israeli soldier got killed. But if this would have happened, I don't want to imagine whether we would be speaking today after the first Northern War or the third Lebanese war or during this war. So I think that when we discuss the mandate, the problem is that we Israelis are putting a lot of importance to this article that authorizes UNIFIL to take all necessary action, etc., while the Lebanese and the Europeans are putting the emphasis on the fact that UNIFIL came to assist the Lebanese army over there. And this is a huge difference because bottom line is that UNIFIL is saying we cannot enter to private territories. We cannot enforce our presence in private territories, which includes, by the way, olive orchards or just the small alleys between the homes in the Shiite villages, while Hezbollah is disturbing their movement again and again and again. This force budget is about $100 million a year. And it does bring some success when we speak about mediating, peacekeeping, I don't know, but keeping the border calm, okay. But if Hezbollah decides to carry out terrorist attack, cut in the fence, excavate tunnels, hide rockets, UNIFIL failed to stop all of that. And I just want to show you a short video just for my closing remarks before we move to Yifa, of an incident that happened about a year and a half ago between Hezbollah operative that actually attacked UNIFIL patrol that entered one of the Shiite villages not very far from the Israeli-Lebanese border, Majd al-Zum, burning their vehicles while the soldiers are inside. This is a very serious incident that was not reported, by the way, on the website of UNIFIL. We understand that these are Hezbollah operatives. We in Alma found evidences that this was done by Hezbollah, but you see, they're not wearing uniforms. They're dressed as civilians. And that's exactly the game that they are playing with UNIFIL, as it's like civilians that were angry about these Zionist agents. This is how they defined UNIFIL, how Hezbollah defines UNIFIL, that entered to their village, but actually they're standing, I don't know if you can see this, but they're standing in the entrance to a military base over there. So just let the video speaks for itself. You see they're taking the arms of the soldiers, and UNIFIL is actually intimidated by Hezbollah in South Lebanon.
Thank you, Sarit. After hearing what Sarit said, UN mandate, working, not working, Hezbollah in the south, and actually, if we think back to how Sarit opened the webinar, I'd like to ask if you were in charge, what would you recommend to do with the mandate? We know there's a vote coming up. I think August is the next vote for from August 2020 to August 2021. What would you do with the UN force here? What would you recommend? What's best case scenario for all of us?
Well, I first want to comment on something. You know, I'm a lawyer, and you know, not everyone's perfect, but you know, when I look at these UN resolution, at you know the international community, I mean, look, I mean, we've seen this. You know, the funniest story to do with the UN force, I think, was when the civil war started in Syria. Rebel forces kidnapped 22 UNDOF's men. Not one bullet was fired. They just took them hostages. I mean, these men are armed, heavily armed, and they just took them hostages without even a small struggle. And I think it says a lot. I think when you are, you know, an Indian soldier, a Filipino, so, you know, why would you now fight to death on a land that is not yours in a dispute that is not yours. I think this is an inherent problem, and we've seen it happen. Like I said, in Syria, they just ran. In Lebanon, UNIFIL, I mean, I think maybe Sarit was a bit generous by saying that, you know, they disguise as civil. I mean, I think that there's more to that. I think everybody knows that it's Hezbollah. I think it's all done quietly. I mean, we've seen, and I think Sarit can tell you more than me about, you know, I mean, they just literally look the other way. I'm not just saying it as an expression. We see them there and they look the other way. And then, you know, when Israel is trying to play the game, right, by submitting all kinds of reports and reservations and reporting the violations in the south of Lebanon. This is not a small violation, by the way. This is like an unbelievable, like this is a fundamental, this is like tearing up the agreement and just doing whatever you want, just having like all kinds of foreign soldiers running around and playing some kind of a role. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I think at the end of the day, you know, when people suggest maybe we should leave the Jordan Valley and establish a new international force. Really, I mean, even in 1967, I mean, one of the signs that Israel had that the Egyptians were about to attack is the fact that the international force just ran. So, you know, we knew that this was coming. So, to be perfectly honest with you, I mean, I don't think it's helpful. I think that there's a mechanism where you know, I think basically UNIFIL is terrified of Hezbollah. I mean, I would have been terrified of Hezbollah if I was there. And there's like an appearance to order, you know, in the international arena that is completely fake. So, you know, if the United Nations is you know, if UNIFIL is coming to the Nations saying, you know, more or less it's okay here, like, you know, we're keeping things in order and we're respecting the resolution, then this is what the world hears of it. Now, not that I necessarily think that, you know, if they had reported the truth, the UN would have done something about it, but you know what I mean? But at least we could have had an honest conversation. So I'm not sure about the solution, but I think, you know, international peacekeeping forces, you know, it's, you know, spend your money on helping the corona crisis and buying, you know, ventilators and medicine and boost your economies. And even though they have like great duty frees, I was once in Undorf in Syria, and I was shocked to see that, you know, you can get like stuff without taxes. That I thought that was the only advantage that they had. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my opinion.
Sarit, I'll let you finish the discussion about the UN. We know sometimes we talk to congressmen and we talk to people that we meet, and we meet with IDF commanders. What's your recommendation? But really in a sentence and a half, Sarit.
Only a sentence and a half. My recommendation is to keep UNIFIL. We need an interim mediator that will be able to mediate small fights between the children, between Israel and Lebanese army, and here and there Hezbollah. But we need to understand that UNIFIL would not do much more than that. And that's why I don't think that we need 10,000 soldiers. It's a waste of money. By the way, Yifa, they are giving some help and medical help to the Lebanese themselves, though it's not exactly what they're there for. But including immunization of the ships.
Yes, and maybe a few blonde children, I don't know.
But bottom line, I think that it's good to have international forces on our borders, especially on this border, but not exactly that what those who designed 1701 meant. And that's why I think that the force should be much smaller. By the way, if we speak about a scenario of war, to have 10,000 UN soldiers there would be pretty dangerous and will put a lot of obstacles and difficulties when we speak about human shield, because it's obvious that Hezbollah will use UNIFIL as human shield. So that's just another reason why I believe that since we don't see any effectiveness of this force, it should be minimized, and we should think of other creative, I don't know, solutions, but creative actions that could be done to change the situation along the Lebanese-Israeli border.
All right, I want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I'll ask Sarit, I'll ask you a question, and I'll rephrase a question from Steve here. He asks, do you think all these border incursions and political protests against Hezbollah will lead to a third Lebanon war? And I'll rephrase, and you could open we can take down the fourth wall and open up the discussion that we have a lot. Where's this leading? All right, I know it was connected to the opening, but where are we going with these Sudanese people? Is it economics? Is it a beginning of something?
Well, this is a very serious, heavy, and frightening issue, and you and I were laughing a little bit, and it needs explanation. We were laughing because this is the debate that we have now in Alma Center. Every morning, there is a disagreement between myself and Tal Be'eri, who is the head of our research department. He is not online today, but definitely this is a question. And I want to explain, because when I look at what is happening, I have deja vu. I have the feeling that I've been there, done that in 2006. And in 2006, there were a lot of provocations along the fence. This is a tactical level. And there were a lot of difficulties to Hezbollah on the strategical level. There was a national dialogue in Lebanon that was dealing with the disarming of Hezbollah, a lot of international pressure on Hezbollah and internal pressure of Hezbollah. And then Hezbollah carries out the kidnapping of the soldiers in July the 12th, 2006, and we have war. And the big question in Alma Center is whether this is the same scenario now. And since we are not intelligence, we don't have all the information. We only have what is out there in public open sources. We can't know. We can't know whether Hezbollah is already planning the next terrorist attack. But no doubt that if I was like walking now in the corridors of the bunker of Nasrallah, this question is being asked there as well, whether carrying out a terrorist attack against Israel at this time will serve for the benefits and the interests of Hezbollah on Iran. And if they will get to the conclusion that it will, they will carry out a terrorist attack on the border, hoping that it will change their situation in Lebanon. And again, I don't have a clear answer. I'm sorry for all the attendees with us today, because I'm not intelligence anymore. But I do understand that this option is much more clear and realistic than it used to be, I don't know, a few months ago.
All right, we have another question. I'll pitch this one to Yifa because it's right up her lane. And I ask Yifa, do not go into another history lesson. But the question is I'm not sure from who. I can't see the guy that wrote it. But it's a good question, I think, for Yifa. He asks essentially, do we use the legal terms enough when Israel presents its case to the world? You brought up San Remo, which gives us a much broader border than what we have right now, even. You, as you know, that's right up your lane, the legal aspects. Do we use our legal rights as a country as claims when we advocate for Israel enough?
Well, I think that in order to use it enough, you need to learn it and know it, and then use it. And unfortunately, this was not done. I mean, this was not done at all. Is an understatement. I think it took to stop and say, wait, like, you know, what is our justification in a legal sense, and start, you know, creating some kind of a positive message about our legal rights to the territory. I think that people get confused between the political debate, which is, it's super important. It's crucial in the Israeli democracy to understand, should we keep the territory? Should we not? When? How? What? All these different issues. What about the Palestinians? What about the international community? What about sanctions? What about this? What about that? Those are all separate issues. I mean, the issue of our legitimacy, our legal rights to the territories is something that people don't separate from those political issues. And I think the answer is very simple. Yes, Israel has very clear legal rights to the territory. It doesn't mean, that it necessarily dictates the result, but we need to know why, that, like you said, the San Remo resolution, Balfour Declaration, our Declaration of Independence, the war of independence, the Six-Day War. I mean, there's a whole issue of legal arguments that are great, valid legal arguments that I think we haven't, not just to say that we didn't educate our people. Our own people are not educated enough. And I think now, especially when we're talking about, to Israeli law to parts of Judea and Samaria, I think, we must have a positive message about why we're doing this. And it's not because we disrespect international law, disrespect human rights. It's because we believe that we are in line with international law and we are in line with human rights. And this is the political decision that was made. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I feel very strongly about this.
No, sure. That's why I brought it up. One last question for Sarit. Funny that Dave asked the question about the tunnels. Sarit, I think you were there. Was it yesterday or Monday latest in the Hezbollah tunnel?
Yeah, I was there on Monday. What do you want to know?
He asks if there's any latest update. Just I think if you can give a few words about how you see the tunnels. As IDF tells us, there are no tunnels that cross the blue line today. They firmly assure that every time we bring up the question. They're very sure of themselves. But I pitch the question to you, not to the IDF.
Personally believe that Hezbollah doesn't need tunnels in order to cross the border, and he proved that only last month with his holes in the fence. So there may be more tunnels that didn't cross into Israel, and that's why Israel couldn't find them, because Israel didn't want to violate the blue line and search for the tunnels only on the Israeli side of the blue line. And to finish those tunnels and to cross into Israel within a few meters, or even without finishing them, it's only a matter of weeks to go on top of the ground and excavate what was left, because all the tunnels, by the way, that were found with no exits. IDF had to search in the ground in order to trace them. So the whole logic or doctrine of the IDF along the borderline, I think today is a bit different than it used to be in the past year and a half. I think that today the IDF is looking at the option of a penetration and of how to prevent penetration of Hezbollah, of hostile players into Israel, whether it's by underground or above the ground. To be honest with you, I'm not sure that IDF is capable of actually securing every inch of the border. It was always a problem in all of our borders. You even see this in Gaza with all the measures that we're taking there, and the fact that in Gaza the view is different from the north, because in Gaza it's all flat. It's much easier to see people that are crossing, while in the north it's all hills and valleys and trees. There are tons of places to hide. Those of you who will join us to a virtual tour will be able to see the terrain. It's really easy to hide. And actually to cross in such a difficult terrain to secure, it's really challenging. And I think this is what the IDF is really busy in, how to secure us. I live about 7 miles from the border with Lebanon. That's far away in Israeli terms. Avram, I guess you live a little bit closer to the Syrian border.
Yeah, the Syrian border is peaceful.
Yeah, and you have a better fence.
Exactly.
You have a better fence. So that's how it is today. I visit the tunnel almost once a week, with or without getting in, just to see what is happening. And I see the posters and the flags of Hezbollah nearby, and Hezbollah is very much present over there.
All right. I'd like to end with that. I'd like to say to our viewers, in terms of the legal aspects, disputes, territories, follow Yifa. She's a professional. Follow the International Legal Forum, the ILF, online. You'll see most of the stuff there. I'd like to thank you, Yifa, for joining us. Thank you, Sarit.
For having me.
Thank you to all the viewers that were with us today. Follow us, as I said, and share. And happy you enjoyed. See you next time.